Welcome. We are working on new look number 6764 pajama pants. We are doing view A in a size small. View A in a size small. We have already traced our pattern, cut out the fabric, and we have already gone through and marked the fabric. I also have taken the liberty of transferring my buttonholes, and I have already ironed on my fusible interfacing and created my buttonhole, both on the front side of my fabric and the second layer of my fabric. So both buttonholes are indeed in place. You can see that as I open it up. They will sit like this at the front of your belly. And this is where the string will come through along with the elastic. And we'll get to that step when we're there. You should have already watched the buttonhole tutorial in order to put these on your pants. So we are going to move along. The buttonhole was step number 1. Step number 2, since I am doing view A, I am not going to do step 2 as this is for view C. So I'm going to move along to view number 3, or instruction number 3. This is for views A, B, C, and D. Stitch pants front to the pants back at inner leg seam. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to open up our pants. This is my pant front. I have it labeled here. This is my pants back. I'm going to go ahead and move this one to the side, and I'm going to move this one to the side so you can see it. So I am going to take my pant front and trying to make my picture look like this. I'm going to take my pant back, and just like we did in the mini pants, we are going to stitch right along here. So I'm going to place my fabrics right side together, and this is how my pants should look. It's in reverse of the picture, but the thing is still there. Here's my buttonhole, like the back image. We've got the back in front, that is the longer curve. And now I'm going to go ahead and match my notches and pin down this inseam. So here is my notch on this side and my notch on this side. So I'm going to line those up. And I do that by just flipping my fabric back and forth. I'm going to pin my pants together in that area. And then you will notice that right here, the point of this fabric extends past the bottom piece of fabric. This is correct. When you are sewing at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, this is actually going to finish right here where that intersection is. So we don't have to worry about this excess here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin there. And then I'm going to continue to pin all the way down my leg. As I've mentioned before, I tend to pin about a hand's length apart with only a few exceptions. So about a hand's length apart. We don't want the fabric to move while we're stitching. And I'm also making sure that my fabrics, the raw edges of my fabric, are staying even at the top. I don't want to pin with one side taller than the other. You want to make sure that they are level at the top. So here, the top part of my pant is a little bit higher. So I'm going to scooch that down so they are level. And I'm going to go ahead and put one extra pin here to hold that into place. This wrinkle here that we have is because this is the beginning of trying to make these pants three-dimensional. We are not flat pancakes. We cannot fit in this. We will have to make this a little bit more round for us to fit. So here is one leg. I am simply going to fold it up just a bit, move it out of the way, and let's go ahead and pin the other leg exactly the same way. Now here's my back. I can take my front, again we're doing right sides together, and place it on top. Here's my notch, and there's my notch for the other side. So I'm going to just move my fabric back and forth, pin those, and here's another look where you can see this back, the bum piece of fabric, coming out and extending past the front. That is correct. We want to leave that there, and it will make more sense as you stitch. Now we're going to go along, of course, about a hand's width apart, and we are going to continue. Whoops. We are going to continue pinning this all the way down. Now, normally I'd be sitting in my chair pinning this. I don't normally take all of my time to pin out at the table. If you need to, you can. Of course, we do have to share tables when we're doing that. But if you're able to pin at your desk, you will have just as much space to do that. I tend to pin at my desk, my chair, because usually I have enough room on my desk to do this. I'm here at my cutting table right now, just so I can lay it out and make sure you have enough view to see what I'm doing. Now here my pants go apart, right? I've got the bottom one not at the same height, so I'm going to scooch it up. And this is the beginning of me making my pants more three-dimensional. So I've got one leg here pinned and ready to go. I have got one leg here pinned. You can hardly see it. One leg here pinned and ready to go. And one leg here pinned and ready to go. So I will meet you over at the sewing machine. Okay, so here we are at the machine. I am ready to sew my two inseams. It does not matter which leg that you begin with. Both of them need to be sewn, so you just choose which one you want. I am using a thread that is going to blend in and match my fabric, because if my seams open up a little bit, I don't want this to show. This is also going to be the thread that I use for my top stitching as well as my hem, and it blends in with my fabric really nicely on the correct side. One thing that you do want to make sure of, you want to start your seams at the top curve. This is called directional stitching, and you always want to start your stitching line from the topmost part of your body and go down towards the lowest part of your body, depending on which garment that you are sewing. So this is the topmost part of my seam. It's the bottom of the crotch, and I'm going to go all the way down my leg. Now I'm still set up for my buttonhole, so I'm going to go ahead and change that back. I'm going to increase my stitching. I prefer about a 2.8 on this machine, and I am taking note that I am going to be sewing at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. My machine is set up currently where my needle is in the very center, so I'm going to double check where my markings are on my plate. And here is where 5/8 is. I'm matching it up with the needle where it's going to go in. And yep, this is correct, my 5/8 inch marking. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got my pin cushion here. You'll have your box because you're going to take out the pins as you go. We don't sew over pins. I'm starting not at the very top raw edge, but I'm actually going to start in 2 or 3 stitches. I'm going to go down and back from my back tack, and that's when I will clip the very edge of my fabric. Sometimes if you start at the very edge of your fabric way back here, what happens when your needle goes in the very first time is it shoves it into that hole, and then you get a big knot and you have to start over. So I come down just a tiny bit. I go forward, backward, forward, and then I continue on my seam allowance. Here I am going backwards all the way up. Now I'm at the very edge of my fabric, and I'm going to now go forward, and I've completed my back tack. And I'm at my 5/8 inch seam allowance. And I'm just keeping an eyeball on this. Remember, if you like to use the tape, you are welcome to use that. It's called draping tape, and it's on our notions wall in one of the pull-out drawers. And you are welcome to use that to help mark a guide for you. Now, if you'll notice, my needle just landed up. I have on my machine a way to allow my needle to stop in the down position. I believe that the Berninas and the Brothers have this. I like it because if I accidentally am pulling out my pin and I'm too rough with my needle sunk, I can't pull my fabric out. The two Genome machines are a more manual type of machine. So I don't know if you have that automated option. But when you stop, you could always roll your flywheel so your needle is in the down position before you make any adjustment. Now, as you can see, my fabric is getting all bunched up over here, right? Well, I don't have another person back here, but I do have my wall and the back of my desk. So just know that you will probably experience this too, since you are partnering in front of somebody. And it's okay. You just want to try and keep your things, your stitching, out of the other person's stitching so you don't accidentally stitch each other's items. And here's my last pin for this leg. And my back tack. And that's it. I'm going to clip my threads. And I'm leaving a long tail, so I'm ready to go on my next seam. Before I even move this out of the way, I'm going to clip these and get rid of this tail at the top. And now this leg is completely done, so I'm going to do the same thing to this one over here. Starting at the top, starting in 2 or 3 stitches, back tack over the edge, staying at a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way down my inseam. I come up to the end, back tack, and I'm done. Trimming my thread, leaving a long tail attached to my needle. You'll see here that my hem is not identical. This back piece is just a little tiny bit longer. It looks like it's about 1/8 of an inch longer. Honestly, chances are it could be a couple of different things. Most likely a miscut. I might have been cutting too quickly in the video. But I can take care of this later. It's not something I have to worry about right now. We'll take care of it when it comes time to do the hem. Now, I just want to point out, I know that there will have been some concerns about this point not matching up with this point, and here's what I want to show you. The seam is coming up. Let me put my sewing gauge here so you can see it. Now my sewing gauge is right on my stitch line, and you can see that my stitch line is right where these two pieces of fabric intersect. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. It's a little easier to see on this side. That's exactly what we wanted to do. We want our seam to be where our fabric intersects. Our fabric does not intersect over here, so what we're doing is we are creating these angles for the location for them to intersect. All right, so I have got both pant legs ready. This is where I am going to insert, you taking care of the raw edges with the serging machine. You should have had that tutorial before you get started. So I will see you at the serger. Okay, here we are at the serger. So we have just finished up step number 3, and we have these raw edges for the inseam. This is where we are inserting. We're going to serge these raw edges so that way you won't have any fraying after you wear and wash these pajamas. So I have already done just a small test with my scrap fabric to make sure that my machine is okay and all the settings are all right. I recommend that you doing that. Since we share our machines with so many people, not everybody leaves it in the position that you need it to be in. So I always recommend to go ahead and put it where it needs to be. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take my inseam, and I am just going to line it up right here on the edge of this metal line right here. Sorry, not the metal line, the edge of the metal right here. This is what I am using. That places my seam right here at this notch right here. And if you remember, these two little notches show you where those two needles are stitching. And I am just going to sew away. It's going to cut off some of my edges. Now remember, when you sew with this machine, you have to stop and pause and readjust your fabric. If you have any fabric tucked up underneath and you sew it, you will cut a hole in it, because we have the blade engaged in order to cut off that excess seam allowance. So you want to make sure that you are just stopping occasionally and making sure that everything is okay and you don't have any tucks in there. You can see my fabric over here scrunching up. Obviously, you're doing that because you've got somebody across from you. So that's something that you really want to be mindful of. Now I'm going to let this run off of my fabric, and I'm giving it a slight baby tug because I want to leave that tail right there. I want my tail to be about the same length as my hand, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it up here and leave just a baby tail on the edge of my pant hem. I'm going to come up to the top, and I'm also going to just leave a baby tail at the top of my pant leg. And here is done. And here's the back side of that. No way that's going to fray out when I wear it or wash it. I'm going to fold this up and just set it to the side. Here's my second leg. And again, we are still dealing with directional stitching. So you should be sewing from the crotch, the curved parts, all the way down to the hem of the leg. And remember, with this, we don't do a back tack. It is knotting as it goes. Running it off the edge of the fabric, a baby tug. My tail is just as long as my hand with the tiny tail at the bottom of my leg. Cutting off my excess here. And there we go. And that is both inseams done. And now number 3 is complete. Now here is the next interjection that I'm going to make with the serger. We have sewn these two sides inseams together, both the back and the front together as one piece. Our next step, number 4, is going to have us sew the crotch together. But first, we're going to need to actually serge this U on both legs of the pants first. So what I'm actually going to do is open up my pants. And you can see here, it's kind of big, but you can see here, this is my U. I am going to serge this leg in this big U, and then I'm going to serge the next one in the big U before I go back to my machine and sew these two pieces together. So I'm going to line it up exactly the same way. Now, if you'll notice here, though, I am cutting off a tiny bit. This is going to adjust my seam allowance for this seam just slightly. My seam allowance should be 5/8 of an inch, but if I'm cutting off an 1/8 of my seam allowance, I'm going to have to stitch less a little bit, an 1/8 of my overall seam allowance when I sew my two pieces together. Otherwise, my seam allowance will be overall too small. And you go slow around the curves, making sure, again, you got to make sure that you don't have anything catching. Nothing tucked up underneath. And ran off the fabric, leaving the tail long, leaving a baby, and trimming this one off as well. Okay, so here's one leg done. It looks like this. This is just my U, and the whole thing is serged, ready for the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one as well. And then we'll be ready to move on. Go slow during the curve, making sure nothing is tucked up underneath. Making sure you actually are completing a curve and not just stitching down straight. Just slow down and you'll be fine. And here I am running off the fabric with a baby tug, leaving my tail long and a short tail here, cutting off the excess here. All right, and here is my second one. All right, I will meet you back at the cutting table. Okay, here we are back at the cutting table. This is what it looks like once you have everything serged. Now, at this point, I'm actually going to recommend that you go ahead and iron these pieces, and you're going to want to also iron your inseams. I am just waiting for mine to heat up. So while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and take one leg and just move it out of the way. When you iron as you go, it gives you a much nicer, more professional looking product, garment, whatever it is that you're creating. It's really my number one tip for making something look extra nice. Now, my ironing board is set up to be able to take an iron at the same time. Ours at school are not set up that way, so you will want to be using the ironing board there. And you'll see what I'm doing is actually ironing this seam over to one side. And just to make sure I've got it, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. And I'm also going to iron it from the top. All right, and there's one leg. Now you can see that I'm actually going over the serging. Sometimes it bubbles up as you're sewing. So that's just a nice way to make sure that it's going to lay down. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to the front. Now we should have multiple irons around the room in many spaces so that way we don't get too caught up. There we go. Okay. So remember, iron as you go. You will like your pieces so much better. Now, the next step is number 4. With right sides together, pin the center seam, matching the interleg seams, the notches, and the small dots. Stitch, leaving an opening between the small dots so we can insert our elastic. And then to reinforce the seam, we are going to stitch it twice. Trim seam in curved area to 1/4 of an inch. Now, we don't have to do that because we have gone ahead and done the serging instead. So you don't have to worry about trimming that down. So I want to make my pants look just like that. So I've got right side up here, and I'm going to take right side here and put them right on top of each other. Now I am going to match the inner leg seams, and that is right here. Trying to match the inner leg seam. Okay, inner leg seam matched. Now I'm going to come up and I'm going to find my notches over here. And they are here. And I'm going to find my notch over here, which is here, and my small dots. Now, I like to use 2 different color pins sometimes when I sew, simply because I need to remember to not sew between my dots. So by using a different color pin, I can remember, hey, something important is supposed to happen right there. Because sometimes I just get into this lull of just sew. So now I'm going to go ahead, and I know that this is a hand apart, but we're starting a curve here, and I like to pin more when I'm going into a curve and I'm on a curve. I'm making sure that my seams are level, my edges are level. You don't pin it with one edge above the next. And we're going to go all the way around. You can see I have significantly more pins than I had in doing our inseam. As I'm going around this corner steering, I definitely do not want it to move on me. And finally, the end. All right, so here is number 4. I am all pinned and ready to go. So I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to stitch. I'm going to leave a space and I'm going to continue with another back tack, and I'm going to go all the way around and a back tack at the end. And then I'm going to go over it one more time to reinforce it. See you at the machine. Okay, here we go. So I have got my seam allowance all pinned, my 2 dots marked, and I'm going to go ahead. Now I'm using my same seam allowance. Actually, nope, I'm not using my same seam allowance. My seam allowance was 5/8 of an inch, right? But I trimmed off with the serger 1/8 of an inch. So now I need to shorten this, my seam allowance, and I'm going to actually be sewing at 1/2 an inch. So let's line up where that's at. Okay, now if you have tape, you can put a second color tape there if you're going to do that, or you can just pick up and move the tape if you want. All right, again, starting in a stitch or 2 so I don't catch my fabric and plunge it down into my machine. I'm going to do my back tack, and I'm only going up to this first dot, and I'm going to do a back tack. Okay, I'm going to pick up my needle, and I'm going to scooch it forward to the next dot. I'm going to sink my needle just to make sure I'm in the right spot. Yep, I'm good. So now I'm going to do a back tack again. And I can go ahead and keep sewing now. Now I'm feeling a little bit of tension here, so I'm going to double check my seam to make sure I'm okay. I did hear a weird noise when I did that second back tack. Nope, it looks okay. I think it's just the fabric and the needle. I might need a new needle. Oops. All right. Now, I am finding that it's hard for me to, I'm finding that it's hard for my machine to pull my fabric through. And that's because all of my fabric is down here. And it's making my machine struggle a little bit. I can feel those feed dog, the teeth are not really pulling my fabric with ease. That is going to cause my thread to break. So what I'm going to do to try and help my machine out is I'm going to take this, and you can put it on your lap so it's just closer. But I'm going to take mine and I'm going to put it over here because I have some space. And this removes all gravity. Remember, gravity hates us. So we want to do whatever we can to avoid gravity at all times. And as I stitch, yeah, that seems a lot better. My machine does not seem to be struggling. And again, I'm still feeling right here, making sure nothing is tucked up underneath. If you do get it tucked, that is seam ripping time. Taking out my needles as I go. Nothing is tucked. leaving my tail to my machine. I'm going to go ahead and trim both of these. And I'm going to come in now and actually trim out this little hole that I left. And look at here. This is the back of my fabric. Remember I said it made kind of a funny noise? It did. It caught a little bit. I have some little threads right here. It kind of made a little baby bird's nest a knot. But I was able to keep stitching. I do not see any issues with it at all. So I'm going to go ahead and trim those down because that was a knot. I'm going to trim this one off. And just to make sure that since I have this weirdness right here, I actually want to open up my pants to my seam and make sure that it is not problematic from the front. And it doesn't seem to be. So I'm okay to go ahead and move on to the next step. Oh, no, I need to sew it again for reinforcement. Whoops. Got to follow the instructions one more time in the exact same spot. Okay, this time I think I'm going to remove it so it doesn't create a knot again. Here I am making the back tack. All right, here we go. You can feel that gravity again. Woo! Let's see what happened there. Got a little tangle. Cut that out. Looks like I need to remove a few stitches. There we go. Let go. There. Not sure why it did that. Let's take a look here. My thread is okay. Honestly, I think I need to change out my needle. I've been sewing a few things with this, so I think it might be dull and the thread is not running through it okay. So maybe I shouldn't go super speedy, and I will slow down a little bit until I replace my needle. All right. So now I'm going to trim that off, but I've also got these threads here, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that down. Okay, and I've got my threads at the front. I'm going to trim off. Okay, now this is what that double seam looks like. Whoa, that's all blurry. So that double seam, honestly, you can't really see it so well on the camera. Here, maybe you can see where there's two distinctive seams. Your goal is to do it like right on top of each other, right next to each other. You just want that reinforcement. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you're not attempting to sew it at a whole different seam allowance. You're trying to get it pretty close to the same spot. And here I am. That center crotch, the U, is completely sewn twice for stability. And we're ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so here we are, just finished up with number 4. We can see I've got the space here between my dots. I've got my buttonhole. I've got my seam twice. I did not have to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch because I have my serged seam allowance here, so you don't have to worry about that. Now you can go ahead and iron this seam allowance here. That is going to be the next step. You are going to want to do that with a ham. When you have a curve, you cannot iron flat. So you are going to have to use a ham to get this ironing open. Now we do have some spots that are flat, so I'm going to go ahead and do those, and then I'll use the ham for that curve. Just to open up that seam allowance like that. Now right here is about where it is starting to curve. So I'm going to use my ham, and it allows me to run my fabric on top of that in the same curve and open it up just the same. You're going to do that all the way around. Each of our irons should have a ham at it. If it's not, it is at the main station near my desk in the two small rolling carts. Here's the last of my curve. Sometimes it's kind of fiddly. You just work with it. Okay, I can move this out of the way now because that last little bit that I have is flat. Perfect. Now you can see here is where our hole is, where the dots were. I've got just enough for my scissor tips to go through. You can see it on the back side. You don't have to do this. I just wanted to show you that this is where it is. It's right there. And this is where we're going to be pulling our elastic through. Okay, so the next step that we're on now after ironing is going to be step number 5, stitching the front to the back at side seam. Okay, so we know this is the front because this is where the buttonholes are, and those are going to be tied at your waist. So we are going to stitch the front. I'm going to open this up. Here's my back, and I'm going to stitch it here at the side seam and here at the side seam. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is match my notches. Get that there. And then I can go back through and pin everything. Now, this leg, I think that I'm going to add a few more pins than my whole hand placement because this is the leg where when we lay it flat, they are not the same width. Remember this during our mini pants lesson? This is the leg where we have to pull it over like that. So in order to make sure it stays while I'm sewing, I think I'm going to go ahead and add just a few more pins, making sure that they're level. You don't want them like that. And I know many of people will watch some of the posts on Instagram, TikTok, and there are a lot of stitchers that are not sewing with pins. They are doing a slightly different type of sewing, as well as these are probably professionals in the industry, and they have multiple years of experience. And it is also very likely that they are working on an assembly line where they are continually sewing the same seam or seams over and over and over again. That's practice,
And when you are a professional and you are sewing the same seams on repeat, after a while, you may not need to pin it. So I'm going to ask everybody to pin. Now we can see here we've got that bubble, right? It's not laying flat, and that's on purpose because we are not flat pancakes. We are round beans, so we want that there. Here's my other leg. I'm going to notch my knot. There it is. And I'm going to have to draw up my raw edges to make sure that they're level. This is a bad pin. It feels like the silver coating has come off of it. When I go through my fabric, it's just kind of icky and gross. So I'm going to throw this away. Sometimes we run across those, or sometimes you'll run across a bent pin. You can go ahead and just throw those away. Ooh, every once in a while, you'll come across a pin that actually does not have a point, but it's square because it did not get filed down. Those are kind of crazy, but you can throw it away. That is a bad pin too. Ick. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I've got one side seam pinned and ready to go. My second side seam pinned and ready to go. Heading over to the machine. Okay, you want to remember your directional sewing. This is the top of my pant. This is my waistline. This is where my buttons are. So I'm going to start here and go down towards the bottom of my leg. Now I am going back to stitching at 5/8 of an inch because I'm not pre-serged, so there's nothing cut off here. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up. Oop, I forgot to bring my pin cushion back. I'm going to have a mess. Whoa. Gravity. Back tack at the bottom and trim my seam allowance. Nope.
trim my threads, my tail, not my seam allowance. Trim this one. I'm going to come in a little bit from the edge. There comes the back tack. And obviously this is me doing the other side now. Starting at the top, at the waistband, and moving down to the bottom of the leg. Directional stitching. Okay, so now we have finished number 5, stitching the front to the back at the side seams. We are going to interject again. You will be taking care of these raw edges via the serger. Okay, we are still going to be doing some directional sewing. So here is the top of my pants, I know because of the buttonholes. And I am still going to place this in the same location where my stitch line is right here on this marking, and my raw edge is over here right against this metal, and I'll probably be cutting off about 1/8 of an inch again. And you want to be real careful to make sure that you are not, that you don't have any fabric tucked up underneath. Gravity still hates us. I'm going to put all of my excess up here. If you don't have room because somebody else on your table is also working, putting it on your lap also helps. Anything you can do to try and keep that pull away. Remember to keep your tail long. And here I am at the top again, going to do the same to the other leg. Alrighty, there we go. 2 side seams done and taken care of. All the way down. Ready to move on.
Okay, the next step on our instructions is number 6, to keep elastic from getting stuck in the seam allowance as it's inserted. Use fusible web to anchor them to the garment within the casing area. Be sure to remove any hand stitching you may do after the casing is finished. So again, like we did in our sample half-scale pajama pants, you can glue these seams down so you can get your elastic through, or you can stitch them down because maybe you don't have a fusible interfacing and you wouldn't have this opportunity. But you can stitch them down as they show in the diagram, and then what you would want to do is just remove those once the elastic is in. Right, so what I've got here is I know it's kind of hard to see, but I have got my 4 pieces of fusible interfacing. The one thing that I want to make sure and do, because these come in a pre-cut width, is I want to make sure that they are skinnier than my seam allowance. So what I'm doing is I am holding it up to my seam to see if it's wider. And actually it is. I'm holding it right up to on top of my seam allowance, and I can see that it is just over 1/8 of an inch wider than my seam. So what that means is if I were to go in and glue this in, I'd have this glue strip hanging out on the side, which means I would get that glue all over my iron, and it would get on the iron for the next person as well. So because it is so big, what I'm actually going to do is I am going to take this and cut it lengthwise in half, and I will use one on each side. Okay, there we go. So now these are much skinnier, and I'm going to take these, and I am going to, oops, I have got some. It's hard to see it. I'm going to move my bottom piece out of the way. Again, I can iron on my table. You will be ironing on the ironing board. But I'm going to take one piece, and my pieces are about 3 inches long. That's how long you want them, about 3 inches. And I'm going to tuck it right here underneath my seam allowance. Be very careful not to move it. I don't have any glue on the outside. I'm going to take the other one, and I'm going to put it down underneath as well. And both of those strips are about 3 inches and cut in half. They tuck right underneath very well. I'm now going to take my iron, and I'm just setting it here. I'm not ironing back and forth. I just set it there. That is pressing. So I'm pressing my interfacing in so those pieces glue my seams down. And I've counted to just a little bit over 5. I'm just going to check them. Now remember, you don't pick it up and you don't try and pull up while it's hot because that glue will definitely release. So I'm just going to let that cool down. And I'm going to move on to my back, or actually my front, because I did my back first. So here's my front. I know it is because there's my buttonhole. And yes, these are still too wide. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this in half too, just like I did the other one. And I'm going to put it right underneath. And now if you have put your buttonholes in the right spot, this gluing down should not affect that buttonhole at all. This one I have placed correctly. But if you look at this one, I'm going to go on top of that just a tiny bit. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I'm going to hope that it's going to be okay. I think it will. I don't think it will have any negative effect because it's just barely. So I'm going to go ahead and glue right down on top of that. Here we go, counting up to just over 5. Okay, now again, we're not going to pull that up. We want that to cool down, but I can go back and touch the back now. And, oh, didn't quite feel here at the top, so I'll do it again. But the bottom part feels just fine. So we'll go back. And I will just hold this down. Okay, that should be okay now. Letting it cool. Okay, so now I still have two interfacing pieces left. We're going to use these on the side seams. Now on the side seams, what you're going to do is you are going to actually fold it toward the front of your pajama because you've got both of those seams together. I still have to cut it in half. It's still too wide. Here I am cutting in half, and I have got this seam allowance lean towards the front. Nope, I lied. I have it the wrong way. Here's my front. Whoops. Okay, so just make sure you know where your front is. And I'm going to lean that to my front. The whole thing, again, it's still about 3 inches long. Lean that to my front. Make sure there is no glue sticking out. Okay. Count to just over 5. Now, the reason it did not catch the first time, I think, is because I have my iron set on a medium heat because that's what my fabric needs. But the interfacing I'm using actually needs a high heat. But if I do a high heat on my particular fabric, I might melt it and put a torch mark in it. So I really wanted to just use the medium. But that means that I will have to probably, it appears, leave my iron on the area that I'm trying to glue just a little bit longer. And that little bit of time seems to be working. So now I'm going to go over to my other side. And here's my front. So I'm going to take this down. I'm going to tuck it right underneath. And press it towards the front. Make sure it's all in there and there are no glue bits sticking out. Fusible interfacing is called. And it appears that, again, I have to hold this a little bit longer because of the temperature difference between my two textiles. Now we're going to let that set a minute. And while that one is setting and cooling, I can go back and check my front. It appears to be fine. I'll check my other side. It appears to be fine. My back could use just a little bit more. It's not adhering right here, so I'm going to come back and do my back again. But the side that I just did seems to be fine. So my back is really giving me some trouble today. That's okay. We just work with it. You hear my steam going. You can use the steam or not. It's up to you. The steam adds a little bit of heat, but not as much as the hide. And you go ahead and let that sit for just a minute and cool down. Okay, I think that we should be okay now. All right, so now I've got all 4 of my seams glued down. So the next thing we're going to do now is move on to number 7. And this says for view A and B. So this is only for view A and B. If you are doing C or D, you are going to jump and go to number 8 instead. Okay. Press down 1 3/8 of an inch on the upper edge to the inside to form the casing. And then I'm going to press under 1/4 of an inch on the raw edge and stitch close to the lower edge of casing. Okay, so we're going to copy that picture, right? So I have got my tape measure here, and I'm going to go down 1 3/8 of an inch. So I am going to fold this down 1 3/8, a little bit more. Now I've got my fusible interface in there for my buttonhole, so it is proving to be a little bit hard to fold right here in the center front, but that's okay. Okay, that is 1 3/8, so I'm going to give it a pin to hold it in place. I'm going to come now to my side seam and fold it down 1 3/8. We're going to do this all the way around. 1 3/8. Do my other side seam. Now you could use your sewing gauge, that little small 6-inch ruler if you wanted to here. That was too wide, I had to go back. Still too wide. There we go, 1 3/8. Nope, that's a bad fit. All right, there we go. And now I'm coming around to my back. I'm going to fold this down. And you see I'm folding it all into the wrong side. All of these pins have been to the wrong side. Okay. So now I'm going to come back to the front. And now between these two pins, if I give it a little bit of a stretch, like I'm going to use both hands, I'm going to give it a little bit of a stretch, and I can reach in with my thumb. I'm going to put a temporary pin there, and I'm going to check my pinning, and look, 1 3/8. So I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to come over to this side and do the same thing. Whoops. Give it a little stretch between my pins. Put a temporary pin there. It's 1 3/8, it looks a little short. It is, just a tiny short. So I'm actually going to roll that down. And now we're at 1 3/8. We're going to come around and do the same thing to the back. You can even use the table. If your hand will not stretch in that manner. Put it in there to hold it. And here's my last section. It's a little big, so I'm going to bring it in. Okay. Now, you could just go about and pin. I am showing you for the instructions, which tells you to press this area. So I got all my whole waistband folded over 1 3/8. But I'm going to take my iron, and I'm actually going to iron in between my pins. Now, why in between? Because these pins have a plastic head. If I actually iron over the top of them, I'm going to melt them. And it will get on the iron. It will ruin the pins, not pens. So I'm going to iron in between them just to hold it place. Now, I can iron up to the head like this. I can bring my iron up this way. But I just don't want to get on those little plastic hooks. Okay, there we go. So now I'm ironed all the way around. I'm going to turn it back over to the front. As you can see, I've now covered my buttonholes. Here they are, right here. And my buttonholes are going to be basically inside the casing we're making for the elastic. On the back, if I remove this pin, you can see this is where that hole we left between the two dots. This is where that is, because this is where we're going to put our elastic. Okay, so the next step here was, now that I press this, press under 1/4 of an inch on the raw edge. So that means this edge right here. Press under 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to put my pin back. Now I'm going to take my raw edge, and I haven't serged it because I don't have to. We are going to take 1/4 of an inch, which is, on my tape measure, it is actually right here. It's just below my little metal scallop. So I'm going to take my raw edge and I'm just going to measure it. And I am now going to fold under 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to take that pin I had on the top and I'm going to flip it. I'm going to insert it at the bottom instead. And I'm going to do that to every pin that I have. So here's the next one. 1/4 of an inch. Measure that. And there's my pin going in. Now, this one likes to bubble out. So I'm actually going to take another pin and I'm going to insert an additional pin in between the ones that I have. This will ensure that it stays pinned and doesn't open up until I'm ready for it. So we're going to do this all the way around. So I'm on my first side seam here. And I'm going to add a pin to the in-between section. And here I am at my center back. I'm going to double check my measurements for my 1/4 of an inch. Here I am, that's great. I'm going to pin that. And as I'm pinning my seams, I am making sure that my seam right here that I stitch, that I'm folding over, is in line with the seam that continues down my pants, whether it's my back, front, or my side seam. Okay, now I'm back over at my other side seam. That one was a little bit crooked. It was a little off my seams lining up, so I scooched it just a little bit. Here. And I'm doing those in-between pins. Now I'm coming around to my very last section. Here's my front and my last side seam. And I'm going to add my 2 additional pins. Now you are welcome to add more pins if you want. I can see this little section right here because it's my side seam. It's kind of bubbling out a little bit. I think I'm going to add another pin just so it stays. So you can add more in between if that makes you feel comfortable. You just don't want to add so many pins that it creates additional bubbles. Sometimes when you put in too many, it actually makes more bubbles than what you're trying to take care of. This one by my other seam was starting to unroll as well. So I'm putting it to there. And since I've had to do that twice, it actually makes me want to go double check my other seam. Yeah, this one's unrolling just a bit too. So I'm going to put in another pin here. And now that seems okay. Okay, so now they want to compress this again. And this is so it will stay in place while you're sewing. So again, you want to be careful. You just don't want to hit these plastic balls because they will melt. But you can go all the way up onto the metal. just making sure my sides got ironed nicely, and yeah. Okay, so that is almost the end of step number 7. The last thing that we do for number 7 is we're going to come in and we're going to do a stitch line to hold this in place right here at the very end. I'll see it soon. Okay, here I am, and I am going to go ahead and start stitching my seam all the way around. Now, this is my front. I am going to start actually on the back. I'm first going to remove this piece because it makes it a little easier to go around. The reason I'm going to start on the back is because when you're wearing these pants, the front is what everybody is going to see. We have to put a back tack on here, so that's going to be a thicker amount of stitching. And as neat as I can make it, it will look like a thicker piece of stitching right there. And I would rather not be seen in the front of my pants. So I'm going to start in the back of my pants. So that knotting, that back tack will always be in the back and not in the front. So here I am, and you can see here that I am literally going to be right on the edge. Like, it's honestly not even hardly a measurement. I'm going to do like a 1/16 of an inch. It's so tiny. And of course, I'm going to start it with a back tack. And that's the part I don't want to show. And I'm just going to go around slowly, making sure that I stay straight. If I go off of that 1/16 of an inch, I either run the risk of missing my fold over completely, or if I stitch over here, I'm going to miss this fold up completely, and then it's going to come undone and it will begin to fray. So it's important to just go slow and make sure you go all the way around. Now, where it's a little bit thicker, sometimes you have to give it just a little bit of help. I'm not pulling it through, but I'm assisting it through, because we don't want to pull our fabric. We want the machine to be able to do its job. But sometimes those seams, when they're really, really thick, the machine can just use a tiny bit of help getting over the little hump of the seam. Almost all the way around. Here is my beginning, which is the back. I'm almost there. And I'm going to pre-cut my beginning tails, because when I go over them and I back tack, I run the risk of getting them all tangled up. So I'm going to pre-cut those so they are not there. Okay, I overlap my stitching, and I do another back tack to knot this piece of thread here. trim my tails all the way down to the fabric. I don't have to leave anything there because that's why I have a knot, so we don't have to worry about it coming unraveled. And this is what it looks like. You can see in the darker areas here, my stitching is literally right there. It is like a 1/16 of an inch. And this is what it looks like from the front. It's just a nice clean stitch. And so here's my front here, and this is my stitch line versus this is the back. Now I've chosen a thread that really matches my fabric well, so we can't see that knot too well. But looking at this area here where my knot is compared to this area, that thread's almost invisible. But I can see this one. So that is how we go about stitching around the waistband. Okay, the next step, now that we are done with number 7, if you are doing C or D, of course, you would move on to the next one. But for number 9, views A, B, C, and D. Cut a piece of elastic to fit your waist. Oh, we have a correction here. Instead of +3 inches, we are going to do your waist -2 inches is the length you want. We're going to insert this elastic through the opening, overlap the ends, and hold with a safety pin. You're going to try it on to make sure that it fits comfortably, and then you're going to sew it together. So here's what I've got. My sample, we're going to say my person is got a 27-inch waist. So I have cut my 3/4 inch wide elastic to 25 inches. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my safety pin and I am going to go ahead and insert this through the opening in my front. That's that little hole. Now, my elastic is 3/4 of an inch. That is a little bit bigger than this hole. So I'm going to have to kind of fold it to get it in there. But once I get it in there, I'll be just fine. Might take some maneuvering initially. I'm kind of poking around to get it through. And then we go all the way around. Whew, that first entry is tough. There we go. Now, if this is too hard for you to pull through, you could go through with your seam ripper and remove 1 or 2 stitches. Just be careful because as you pull, once you've removed those, you are untying that back tack, untying the knot, which means these stitches will begin to come out. So if you have to do that, you can. Just realize that you'll have to do some additional hand sewing at that point to make sure that everything is secure. Okay, so I'm going past my first seam, and it was no issue because we had ironed it down with that fusible interfacing. And as I tuck it through, I just scooch back. This is the same thing that you do when the string on your hoodies come out. There's my back seam, no issue with that iron down. Now you can see I am leaving this out, and I'm doing that on purpose. And I'll show you why in just a minute. I'm almost all the way around. I want to make sure that I leave myself enough space that I can actually stitch this elastic on my sewing machine because that's how I want to close it up. So now that I'm back, I'm going to bring my safety pin back through that same hole. And again, it's a little bit of maneuvering. Okay, there we go. And I'm making sure that my elastic is not twisted. Sometimes when you go through, you can twist your safety pin and it makes your elastic twisted, and I don't want mine to be like that. So I'm going to undo my safety pin. And now I'm going to overlap this just 1 inch. Just 1 inch. And I'm going to pin it together like this. And sorry, that was Socks, my cat. And she's saying, hello, why aren't you petting me? Maybe she'll jump up on the table and make an appearance for you. What I am doing is I am now going to put this in, and I'm just going to stitch back and forth a great big giant zigzag over the whole thing. Somehow I bumped and I was at the buttonhole stitch. I'm going to remove my pins now to get them out of my way, and I'm going to sink and pivot. So I'm going to kind of make a great big Z. And sink and pivot and go backwards. There we go. Trim off all of my spare threads, and this is what it looks like. I've just created a Z, and that's going to lay real nice and flat now. So now what I need to do is just kind of pull my fabric, and I'm sucking that elastic in through this hole now. And again, if this is really hard, you might consider opening up the hole a little bit. You just need to be aware that it may begin to loosen too much, and you could begin to fray, could rather rip that seam. So you have to be real careful. And just take some time. Obviously, your elastic is going to stretch while you're doing this. Ooh. So I'm just trying to move my fabric around to the front so my elastic has somewhere to go. Okay, now, because this is so big and bulky, I'm probably going to have to work it in and poke it in. So we've got a few tools to be able to do that. We do have some, they're dental tools, and they are up on the notions wall. They're very pokey, obviously. They are legitimately dental tools. But you can take that and you can kind of use it to shove it in. You have to be careful of that poke, though, right? Because you don't want to rip your elastic or your fabric. Oh, Socks did decide to make an appearance. Goodness. Hello, ma'am. She says, why are you in here and not petting me? And, oh gosh, that is a real tough one to fold. So you know what? I am going to open up my seam just a tiny bit with my seam ripper, being very careful to not cut too much. And I'm going to make one seam rip down here as well. There we go. Okay. I can also use my seam ripper to put it in, but remember, this is a blade, so you can only use the tip. If you get it down there, you're totally going to tear something. So you just have to work it through. You could also try and take your nippers, close those up, and those might be able to nip them, push them through as well. You could also use like a pencil or other kind of pokey thing that has a dull edge. That works too. No, please don't jump on the keyboard. Come here. Come. There we go. Hello. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to work that all the way around like this. Very simple. Now the next step, we have to move on to the next page. We have already now completed number 10. That stitch the ends of the elastic together securely. We've got that covered. And now we're going to go on to number 11. Slip stitch the opening edges of the casing together. Okay, so I already have my needle threaded with the thread I've been using out of my sewing machine. So because I did cut those stitches, I'm not going to just do the hole. I'm actually going to go up just above that hole because I want to make sure I reinforce it because I did break that knot. And a slip stitch is just, it's like a whip stitch. You're just going to go whoop, whoop, whoop around. It could be kind of tight. or hard to push your needle through, this is where a thimble would come in handy, because it allows you to push with your finger. Like right now, that hurts. So if I put a thimble on, I'd be able to push with that thimble much easier. And we're just going to keep going all the way down. Almost done. I am right now at the spot where I trimmed, where I opened that bottom seam up. And I can tell it is starting to open up my other seam. So I am going to overlap that as well, just to re-secure it since I broke that knotting. Oop, that's hard to push through. So I only have one stitch left. I'm not going to get out my seam ripper. Instead, what I'm going to do is go down to my table, and I'm gently going to use my table to push that through. Just enough so I can get my fingers on the top, and then if you wiggle it around, you should be able to pull it through just fine. Okay, so now I am all stitched up. I'm going to go ahead and create my knot. I'm going to do that by going back through one last time. I create a loop, and then I go through the loop and pull tight, and I'm going to do it one more time. So I'm going to do a double knot. Take a stitch, create a loop, and then go through the loop. And now I want to hide this tail. So what I'm going to do is going to go into my waist so you can't see it. My needle is inside my casing, and I'm just going to come out somewhere randomly. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to trim the thread over here. And now what I've done is I've taken that tail and I've tucked it inside my fabric so it won't come out again. Okay, and now that is number 11. We're all done there. So we are going to move on now to number 12. Number 12 is putting the ribbon on, or the twill tape through your buttonholes. So cut a length of twill tape. Oh, we are interjecting here again. Instead of just an automatic 62 inches, you are going to do your waist measurement plus 35 inches. Your waist measurement plus 35. So my sample, my waist was 27, so I have 27 plus 35 right here in my twill tape. We're going to insert the twill tape through one buttonhole opening, go around through the casing, and out the remaining opening, having the extending ends even, not the ends, and tying a bow. Okay, so I had not opened up my buttonholes because I did want to point out, I'm sure you've noticed it in past sections of the video, my buttonholes aren't even. Whoops. I thought I had them measured out properly, but honestly, I did not double check them, which means I mismarked it. This one is correct, and I can clearly see that this one is too high. It's in the wrong spot. You can solve this by just measuring first. I just did not double check it. Is it the end of the world? No, because it's still going to work. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to open up my buttonhole by giving just a tiny little snip, and then I bring in my nippers because I don't want to cut my elastic. And I'm going to open up there, and I'm going to turn it around to this side and open up the other direction. Could you have opened up your buttonholes already? Yes, absolutely. I just didn't do it when I had completed the buttonholes. So if you're doing it now like me, just be very careful to not cut your elastic that's on the inside. Okay. Okay. So now, actually, if I pull it down, you can see my elastic there on the inside. I'm going to get my safety pin again. Now, this twill tape comes unwound, so I'm actually going to tie this side in a knot so my safety pin does not pull through and just break the edge. And at the end, it tells you to tie the ends in a knot anyway, so I'm just doing it ahead of time. Get a good knot in there. I'm going to actually run my safety pin through the knot because that will be the most secure. Now, why are we putting this in now? Why didn't we put it in the same hole as the elastic? Well, the elastic is your functional waist to make sure that this fits you. This is a combination. It's partially functional, so if you do want to cinch it up a little bit more than your elastic, you can, but it is mostly decorative. If I had put this in on the back side here, it would have been on the back side of the elastic. It would not have been able to come through the holes of the buttonholes. By inserting it now, we're actually going to run it on the front of the elastic, therefore allowing it to come through the buttonholes, and you'll be able to see it. So you'll have it a little bit more decorative. Okay, you do it the same way. Getting that first one in there is the hard part. Just kind of twist it around a bit. There it goes. And you just want to make sure as you're going through, try not to get it twisted around your elastic. Otherwise, you will end up behind it, and then when you actually go to tie it, it won't tie because it will actually be wound around your elastic. So again, just go slow, trying to pull it all through. Okay, and here's my other buttonhole. I'm going to go ahead and pull that through. Much easier than the first one. Now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and tie this other end in a knot. Take off my safety pin. This is kind of frayed a little bit, so I'm just going to trim that off. Now, these are cotton strands, so we cannot burn this edge to melt it. It is naturally going to fray here at the end. If you don't like that, come up and speak to me, and I can show you how to stitch this to make it nice so it will not fray. So what I'm going to do to get these strands together even is I'm just going to hold them together, and I'm going to slowly pull like this. And now they have run through evenly. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and tie it. And there we go. I'm going to actually make it a little more loopy. There we go. That's that. And I think we only have one step left.
Okay, the last step that we need to do is hemming the pants. Now, you might, at this stage, you should try on your pants and see how long you want them. If they are the perfect length, all you need to do is turn them up. What you are going to do is the same that we did on the waist. And you're going to go up 1 3/8, just like this. You're going to do that all the way around. And then you're going to fold under 1/4. And then you stitch it just around in a circle if you want them the exact length. If they are too long for you, we are going to do these as if they are too long. So if they are too long for you and you have had to hem them up anyway, this is what you're going to do. you are going to determine where 1 3/8 of an inch is from the fold line. From the fold line. So for me, this spot right here is 1 3/8, and I'm going to mark that with a pin. Okay, there's my 1 3/8. So now what I would do is I'm going to lay my pants flat as I can get them, because remember they're kind of round now. Lay them as flat as I can get them. And this is where my pin is right here. So this is 1 3/8 away from where my fold was. That was my desired length. And this is 1 3/4 an inch away from the raw edge. So what I would do here is I would go through and probably mark with chalk or pins, and I would cut this away and I would remove it. Okay? And then you go about folding up your pants at 1 3/8, just like we did with the waistband, right? If you have any questions about that, please come and talk to me. I'm going to go ahead and fold these up at the normal 1 3/8. So here is my 1 3/8. I'm going to do it on my side seams. Remember, you want your side seams to face the front of your pant. So they are flappy like this. Whoops, there we go. They are flappy back and forth. You want to point that seam to the front of your pant. I'm going to do 1 3/8. Do this other one. 1 3/8. And then I'll do the back 1 3/8. Okay, so here I can go ahead and iron it down. Letting my iron heat up a little bit. Okay, and I can go ahead and press this down. Remember, don't go over the little plastic balls on the ends of your pins. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to go ahead and fold it in 1/4 of an inch. And because it's going to want to come undone, I'm going to go ahead and add that extra pin in between. So folding in 1/4 of an inch, adding the extra pin. Okay, and this one is all done. I can go ahead and press it down just to make sure it's nice and neat and doesn't move. Oh, here comes Socks again. She wants to be a pattern wing. Oh, Socks is not a fan of the iron. She's kind of scowling at me now. All right, and we're going to do the same with this side, 1 3/8. Again, you want to make sure your seams, your side seams, fold to the front. I wanted to double check mine. 1 3/8. it in 1/4. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give this a press. Okay, and that is about it. We are headed over to the machine, but I'm going to give you a bonus glance at Socks. There she is, holding down all of my other project I'm working on that I had stacked so neatly. She's decided to be the pattern weight and give lots of cat hair to it. So thank you, Socks.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and pull the machine forward. I am going to leave my arm off to make it easier. Now, again, starting my seam, I am going to start at the inseam because, again, just like the waistband, we're going to have this big back tack, and I don't really want it to show. I could put it in the back, but I feel like it's going to be better hidden on the inseam of my pants, so that's where I'm going to start it. We are going to stitch in the same spot. It's barely a 1/16 of an inch, and we're going to do that all the way around. So here I am with my back tack. Taking out the pins as I go. Just checking to make sure I don't have anything tucked in. You always have to look for that. I know that we're sewing in cramped spaces. Okay, so I am coming up to my original tails from when I started, so I'm going to nip those off. I can nip right down to my fabric because I do have a back tack there, and it will not unknot. I'm going to overlap it, and then I'm going to back tack. Okay, here is one leg complete. There is the back tack. You can kind of see it because it's on the darker fabric, but really in line with everything else, I don't think it's too noticeable. So I'm going to make sure I am doing my inseam here as well on my other leg, just because I want to have some consistency. About a 1/16 of an inch. It's so tiny, that hem. And here's my beginning, so I'll trim these.
Overlap just a little bit, and back top. And trim those off. And that is it. Let's head over to the cutting table. Okay, let's turn these right side out. And here they are, our fabulous jammy pants. You should be able to wear these now. You will need to try them on and get a photo to be able to turn in. We also have a traditional bell ring at the end of this creation. So ask me what that is. And the very last thing that we do once you've tried these on, you are free to wear them for the day after class if you wish to. The very last thing we do now is we are going to clean up our space. So, of course, we are going to take our pattern and we are now going to fold it back together. And we are going to insert it all back into our pattern very neatly for the next person because we are not going to leave it a mess. And now lastly, you have a pajama pant pattern. So you need to keep this. Do not throw it away. When I have a pattern like this, I will take it and fold it up very neatly, just like we did our tissue pattern. And you can clip it together if you want, but you do not want to throw this away. We will be doing something with this at the end of the year for extra credit and one of our last projects. So I like to take mine and fold it up neatly. I tend to keep mine in a Ziploc bag because you won't have this. But now you have this pajama pant pattern. And I just wrote jammy pants, new look 6764. That's the pattern name and number. And I wrote A small. That's because I did view A in the small size. So now if I ever wanted to create these again, I don't have to go through that time of actually tracing that part out again. I already have it. I tend to keep all of my pattern pieces together for one pattern, so that way I know what I have. But you will probably have one size in each of the patterns that you do. And there we go. You are done and complete.